Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session on sustainable energy. Today, we would like to launch the report Rethinking Energy Solutions that was developed as part of the IASA IEC consultative science platform, Bouncing Forward Sustainably. You can find this report at the bottom of this page. And as we all witness, the COVID-19 has caused multiple disruptions to the society, the global economy, and the energy sector is not exception. A drastic fall in energy demand, in a fall in energy investment, and exacerbated global inequality in access to basic energy services are just few examples of developments that took place and continue to take place in the recent months in the energy sector. At the same time, recovery from the COVID-19 provides a great opportunity to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable and resilient energy systems globally. And this would require structural changes within our economy, lifestyles, and production and consumption practices, energy sector, and also transport, buildings, and agriculture. And this report that will be presented today outlines key interventions that are necessary to maximize the impact on transition towards more sustainable and resilient energy systems. Behnam Zachary, who is an energy expert at the International Institute for Applied System Analysis and the lead author of this report, will present these key interventions. Together with Behnam, more than 20 authors contributed to the development of this report. Moreover, the report builds also on the contribution from 38 energy experts from academia, the policy, private sector, and intergovernmental organizations. And these experts, they took part in consultations during the period of June and September last year. And these consultations, they were chaired by Hans Olaf Ibreck, who is policy director of the section for energy and climate at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we would like to thank him and all the experts who contributed to the development of this report. So thank you very much. This contribution was invaluable to the development of this product. So today, the key purpose of this discussion is to present key findings of the report, but also to discuss with you how we can promote this report at the international and national level, how we can amplify messages that came out of this report. We would also like to hear your views on where, at what avenues, what channels, what platforms, events we could advocate for and promote this report. And we would be also willing to discuss with you whether you would be willing to collaborate with us in promoting this report in your countries or at the international level. But before we start, I would like to inform you that you can put your questions in the chat function on your right. You can also ask your question in person once this presentation is over. And to do that, you would need to click on the button at the top of your screen that says Ask to share audio and video, and I will bring you to this session. With that, I would like to hand over to Behnam. Behnam, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot, Katsia. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me and see the screen.
Yes, I do. We do.
Great. I would like to also thank everyone for joining this session. And I would like to save the time and go directly to the report and show you what we have done together with all contributing authors and consultations that we got through the meetings. As mentioned, the name of the report, the title of the report is Rethinking Energy Solutions. And the structure of the report, if I can make a short introduction to that, will start with first of all, talking about the impact of the COVID-19 on the energy sector. And since we started this work last year, we also learned along the way when the pandemic developed around the world. And then we talk a little bit about a rationale for transition, why we need an energy transition and why now, why in the amidst of the pandemic with all the economic constraints and other problems that the countries are facing with. And then we move towards some main areas that are influencing or enabling energy transitions. We try to be broad. We touch societal, behavioral, political, and technological aspects. By no means we do a very in-depth scientific analysis of each of these dimensions, but we try to gather information from the available literature and from the consultation meetings that we had with different experts to learn how we can enable an energy transition. And then we come to 3 areas for policy intervention. And today I will shortly talk about these dimensions, these areas for policy intervention. So in the beginning, in the report, we talk about the impact of COVID-19. And by impact, I mean both positive and negative. Positive in terms of opportunities. We observed short-term, for example, reduction in energy demand, which was, of course, related to containment measures, lockdown measures, but it had short-term positive impact on carbon emissions and air pollution. But also we observed an extensive use of online and digitalized platforms. And the pace that this transition happened, the businesses, the government started to use digital solutions was amazing. And I guess we found it as positive impacts of the COVID-19. But on the other hand, the negative impacts were also quite severe. We observed that the energy inequality worsened in some parts of the world. People had to work from home. People had to do homeschooling. And at the same time, many people with, especially low-income people, they lost their jobs, they lost their businesses, and with increasing the energy bills and, having to working at home and taking care of children, it was a very tough situation for many families around the world. We also observed that due to the lower energy demand, the fossil fuel prices declined. And of course, it was a severe impact on those economies relying on fossil fuel, and it made the economic problems, for example, for investment in low carbon energy transitions. And also in the short run, and we saw supply chain disruptions for the green energy technologies and workforce for some of the energy projects, and in general, lower investment in green energy projects. So these were the impacts that we observed. But at the same time, we were thinking that, okay, how these short-term impacts, how these short-term positive impacts can be maintained in long-term, and what would be the other long-term impacts? What would be, for example, the impact of economic recovery packages on the energy sector? And the rationale for change and for thinking about this was that, of course, as discussed in the stage, the time is short. We need urgent actions to keep in track with the Paris Agreement goals and also meeting other ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and also to cover, to improve some of the injustice that we see in the energy and in the climate arena. And for that also we emphasize in the report the role of science and innovation. And the role of science here can be understood from the response to the COVID-19, that first of all we need to understand the long-term impacts, the uncertainties that is prevailing in the energy system and in the economy with the persistent economic slowdown. Also, we want to identify those policy options that can incentivize people, societies to maintain the positive behavioral and lifestyle changes that we observed during the COVID. How we can use this knowledge that we gained, this collective knowledge that we gained through the pandemic, to use this for coping with other global crises, and also using digital solutions and continue using these platforms even if the pandemic is over. With that, I moved to the main areas of recommendation that we had in energy. We had 3 areas of recommendation, namely reimagining consumption. We identified that the culture of consumption needs to be changed. We need to move towards more circular sharing economy and with more engagement of people, citizen engagement. The second area was reinventing urban space infrastructure and mobility. I guess, as discussed in the stage, the energy demand is growing globally. Also, we know that the rate of urbanization is high, and the way that the cities function today is not promising a very sustainable future. So in this policy intervention in this area, we make several recommendations like promotion of compact urban development and others that I come to that later. And the last but not the least was advancing decentralized, efficient and resilient energy solutions, which we find it a key, and we look into that from different dimensions. I will come to that. So let me just shortly talk about each of these dimensions. For reimagining energy consumption, we look into the role of sharing economies, the role of how we can capture the behavioral and societal and lifestyle changes that we advocated during the COVID, and bringing that to some policy options that can, promote people for using more online, platforms instead of traveling, and using more guiding consumers towards more sustainable choices. Reshaping value chains, responsible business conduct, and circular economy are other items that we have discussed in this title, under this title. The second policy intervention, as I mentioned, was reinventing urban space infrastructure and mobility. And here we tackle the issue from different areas. First of all, we look into urban space as a platform or as a place that can bring different sectors, different dimensions that are usually governed and decided in separate entities and institutions. So we need to put aside this type of separate and silo thinking and make a kind of holistic and comprehensive urban planning that sees the need of the city, for example, for urban spaces from the view of the people, giving more space to people-oriented solutions rather than to cars, looking into the infrastructure for improving low-carbon, flexible, and resilient built environment, and also improving the quality and safety of public transport. And these are some of the solutions that we have discussed in this report, and especially with emphasis on urban villages and compact neighborhoods that bring all the needs of the people around them in near vicinities to alleviate long-term travels in the city. Last, we talk about decentralized and efficient energy solutions. Here, we don't limit ourselves to the technology. We talk a little bit about the value chain, about how, for example, different communities can move towards renewable energy and decentralized solutions. How the role of, for example, designing markets, eliminating fossil fuel subsidies can, enable renewable energy enter the market. And these are the items that we talk, for example, how prosumers can, make an active role in the energy system, how the hierarchy can be eliminated by efficient market economic design, and also role of digitalized solution for having more decentralized technologies. And this is discussed together with energy efficiency under this policy intervention. As you can imagine, the number of topics are quite broad, and we didn't want to just mention and bring all these topics, as energy sector is very big and it has a lot of linkages with other sectors, but we wanted to also make meaningful connection and interlinkages between different topics. I guess with that, I leave you with the report. I guess the link of the report is under this page and you can download it, you can look at that. By no means we think it's a perfect report, so we really welcome any feedback, any comment that you have on the report or on the policy interventions that I discussed today. With that, I come back to you, Qadsia.
Thank you very much, Benon, for this concise summary of the report that is quite long. So this was really very useful to hear the summary. Thank you very much. So before we start the discussion, I would like to invite our audience to take part in a short survey. As I said in the beginning, the key purpose of this discussion is to identify potential communication channels, how we could promote the report this year. So on your right, you could see the survey. And if you could help us to identify the key events, type of channels that we need to promote the report. So please, you can, do you see the survey on your right?
Yes, it's under polls.
Yes,
yeah.
under polls. Yes, you actually need to press polls and then there you should be able to see it. Okay, probably it doesn't work. So we have here as an option academic conferences. We also have as an option international science policy processes such as COP26, which is coming up this year. Also IPCC assessment. We were also thinking potentially of organizing thematic research dialogues and seminars within universities. Also potentially international and national energy forums. For instance, later this year, there will be Vienna Energy Forum. So this can be one example where this report can be promoted. We could also organize global advocacy campaigns or promote the report via social media. All right, I think probably people don't see it. If you go to polls, you can see the question. And if you could indicate what you think the most appropriate way for promoting this report, this would be useful. But in any case, we can go on. And if there are any questions, you can pose them by clicking on the button Ask Share Video and Audio at the top of your screen. So please, those people who would be willing to pose any question, you're very welcome. I see Luis is trying to enter, so Luis, I'm bringing you in. Hello, Luis.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we do.
No, thank you very much. And thank you, Benon, for that very, very good summary of what is a very, very dense report. But I think the three areas that you highlight can really be acted upon with relatively small investments that will create major transformations for a very long term. And I think this is where I think we should really focus our attention. And the second thing is that a point that was also made by you in your presentation, and we do it in our report because I was also one of the authors, is that this crisis has pointed to the unequal impacts of this crisis and how important it is to address the issues of inequality. Our report, although the entry point is energy, because energy is an enabler, it really covers territory beyond the energy sector. We're talking about transport, we're talking about livelihood, we're talking about food, we're talking about architecture, we're talking about many, many things. And so For all of you who are listening and all of you who will be reading the report, will be very, very grateful, as Katia has mentioned, to hear questions, comments, not only during the session, but beyond, to help us, because we can continue to evolve with this report, improve it, build on it. We're going to have a phase 2 of the initiative. So the comments that all of you will be able to give us will be very useful for us to act in the future. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. And I actually would like also to pose a question to both of you, to you, Ben, and you, Luis, about, how do you see the role of science now in trying to promote the implementation of those recommendations? The report also outlines a number of recommendations where science can intervene. So hearing your views on where science would be the most valuable would be really great. So,
Behnam, you go first and I'll follow.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katya. It's a very good question and difficult to answer, but let me take advantage and look at the results of the votes, because I see that also we have from the people who voted, more people have voted on international science policy processes. So I guess it's also telling us about the role of science. And one thing that to me is very important, and we also learned from the pandemic, is that when the government, when people trusted what scientists say, and trusted this collective response to the science, helped the people and communities to cope with the pandemic. Of course, the urgency of the pandemic, the fear of the disease was very close to people, and they could understand it better, and they could respond, more quickly. And we need to also think about the ways that science can, bring the urgency of climate problem to people. We need ways to communicate to people, to translate the scientific language to people, so that the urgency of this crisis would be also understood by people, because otherwise it's very difficult to draw a policy and ask people to implement that policy without them having believed and having understood the urgency.
So in a way, it's about global campaign, raising the awareness about challenges and that needs to be overcome.
Exactly. And also as scientists and science institutions, we need to work on, efficient ways of communicating our message. Not, in a very complicated way, but in a way that it can be understood by people.
Thanks, Behnam. Luis?
Yes, thank you very much, Behnam, for that very comprehensive. I was just visiting the science session before I joined here, and one of the things that comes out was the obvious, which we also have in our report, which is the centrality of science for decision making, for implementation, for coming up with the best solutions, the ones that are short, medium, and long term. But one thing which is not surprising, but that came out in many of our online discussions, is that science has to be much more inclusive, that science has to be supported not only in the developed countries and the rich countries, but that there is a lot of work and investment that we need to make to increase the level of research in the developing countries, in the poorer countries, because most of the research is where the resources are. People have wealth, and people have resources to support institutions of science, and many of the countries which don't have those resources are not necessarily given the proper research in order to enlighten us about the problems, the solutions, and the evolving problems which are evolving so fast. So that's a big area of work which our other section in science is pushing for, and that I think applies very much to our section on energy as well.
Thank you, Luis. And you were saying that science needs to become more inclusive. So how do you envisage what kind of transformations within science systems themselves should take place? How science should be done differently?
Yeah, one of I think that the first thing, as I mentioned before, is that there's a lot of work in providing resources. Development cooperation systems are starting now to provide more resources for research and science into very, very poor countries. But obviously, that will not be enough. I think your main question is, how do we need to make sure that science evolves? And I think it has to be it has to be more democratic. That it has to be that it has to have the infrastructure so that it can be more agile, as our other section is saying. That it can be much more responsive. That it can be much more interface with the policymakers. The science policy interface is unfortunately very, very weak. And one of the reasons is what Behnam said. Many times our communication of our science perspective, our science solutions are not very well communicated. They're always in obscure language. Many times people are not involved in those in that research. So one of the things that comes out, I think, in at least 2 of our reports, maybe 3, is that the importance of the rising of the use of citizen science, so that it's not only research that is being done in elite institutions in Europe and the United States and Australia and Japan, but that it's also being with data being provided and with people being involved out in the field, in the agrarian systems, in the farms, to improve the food systems, etc. And now with the digital transformation that has been evolving very fast in the last few years, we have great opportunities for this science to be really, really transformed. In one of our early sessions of our advisory board, one of the chief scientists mentioned, they even said, the science system is really inadequate for our needs today, and it has to be totally transformed. That was a pretty strong statement. And I think a lot of people are waking up to this. I think all these reports are also pointing in that direction, including our energy report. So I think that's very, very positive.
Luis, Behnam, thank you very much for this contribution. I think this is very important what you're saying, that we should not only apply system thinking to thematic areas, but we should also apply system thinking to science systems themselves, to think strategically where science needs to intervene and how it needs to be strengthened to make sure that it contributes effectively to the implementation of the SDG 7 on sustainable energy, but also of the Paris Agreement. So I would like to thank all participants for joining this session. Unfortunately, our time is over. I don't see also additional comments, but I would like to thank you all for your participation, and I would like to invite you now to join the expo session. So thank you very much to all for joining, and have a good day.
Thank you, Katya and Behnam.
Thank you, Katya, for moderation. Thanks, Luis, and thanks, everyone.